Welcome to Mind Your Health podcast, dedicated to empowering you on your journey to optimal wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Connie, bringing over 25 years of experience in psychology, nutrition, physical therapy, functional medicine, and yoga. Together, we'll explore the interconnectedness of mind, body, and spirit, providing you with the practical insights and holistic strategies to elevate your health. Let's dive into today's episode and take a step closer to a healthier, more vibrant you.
Hi, Shauna. I am
Hi,
so
Dr.
happy
Connie.
that you're here. I've read so much about you, and I can't wait to dive deep into some of the struggles that you've had. And I think there's a common theme here between you and I in terms of all the pain that we've had to endure. But then we've realized a lot, we've grown a lot. And I think you and I are both living proof that gratitude, as well as leading forward into accepting, as well as accepting challenges as opportunities. I think that's pretty much your story, which is so inspirational. Our podcast is all about minding your health. So you are so in alignment, and I love that word, alignment. You're in so alignment with everybody listening, because I know many people are just tired of the treatments that are ineffective and just putting us into protocols. We have so much other layers that we have to uncover for ourselves. So I want to just ask you, Shauna, you've overcome so much. I read about your struggles with Crohn's disease and congenital neutropenia, which is an immune system issue and a heart condition. And when you reflect on your journey, was there a specific moment when you realized you are going to reclaim your life and your health through those challenges?
Yes, and I think it actually began quite young, because I was diagnosed with, actually from the Eastern perspective, my doctor called it ulcerative colitis. The Western doctor called it Crohn's disease. The symptoms overlap. Very early on, it was clear to me that there was an emotional component to what I was experiencing physically. And I think for many of us, we understand that our bodies are sort of spiraling out of control, but we don't really know where to begin. So for me, step one in that journey was slowing down and removing myself from situations where there was such a high level of stress that I couldn't bring mindfulness and awareness to what was happening in my body. So at 15, I was homeschooled for a year. I dropped out of the Ivy League prep high school I had been in, and really began to bring awareness to what was happening in my body. And that was when the healing began.
So can I just stop you right there? You said 15 and boarding school. So you actually have been struggling with from a very early age, provided that it's congenital. So were you having a lot of symptoms at this time affecting your,
Absolutely. Yes. And sorry, the connection, my connection's a little unstable, but it wasn't boarding school. I went to an Ivy League prep school for high school, very high stress academic environment. Yes, I had ulcers in both of my intestines and my stomach. And actually, parallel to all of that, had parasites from overseas travel that took a while to discover. And so there was so much happening in my gut at the time that was impacting my, ability to focus, my ability to consume food and digest food. I was in incredible pain. And just surviving day to day felt nearly impossible. Also at the time, Dr. Connie, I was not a person who spoke up about my needs and my discomfort. I was very quiet about what made me feel uncomfortable physically, emotionally, psychologically, mentally. I think as females in particular, but men as well, we're sort of taught to be strong and to be sturdy and to overcome with resilience before we've even given ourselves a chance to fully process pain. And so instead of vocalizing my discomfort and communicating with my family about what was going on for me internally and physically, I suffocated it all and just tried to get through my days. That went on for months, almost a year. And they understood that I was having some, digestive issues, but the degree of it, I kept very private. I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone to perceive me as a burden or weak. Yeah. And so unfortunately, I suffered for a lot longer than I needed to. I was down to 87 pounds by the time I got proper treatment for the ulcerative colitis / Crohn's disease.
Yeah. That is super hard. I know that very well. So did you have to try alternative therapy during this time to get yourself
interestingly, the first line of treatment was prednisone. So I was on heavy duty amounts of prednisone for over a year and a half, which unfortunately caused some issues for me as a teenager. I had always had really clear, pure skin. My skin became problematic. I began to break out. We all know about sort of like prednisone cheeks, the puffiness and
very well.
sort of squirrel-esque, appearance, which in high school at 14 is an awkward time for your face to shift in that way. And I just had, unfortunately, some other side effects of the prednisone that were more internal and uncomfortable. And so after about a year and a half, I continued to be in pain. My digestion was still a mess. And then they moved me over to Asacol and Tylenol with codeine. And unfortunately, every potential side effect of these medications that a person could experience, I did. So I have a highly sensitive system. And in general, if there's any possibility of a side effect, if there's 5 or 6 potential side effects, I'm 5 out of 6 or 6 out of 6. So I, at a certain point on these medications, just wasn't able to function. And that is when I dropped out of high school. My father was absolutely desperate to get me help. And he ended up consulting with a Chinese doctor who had run one of the biggest medical hospitals in China and who had opened a practice in Los Angeles. And he brought me to this doctor. And he said, we've been on these medications for 2 years now, a year and a half. My daughter's really suffering. What can you do for her? And he looked at my father, and I was right next to him. And I'll never forget this moment. He said, "You have a very nervous child." And I was so defensive. I immediately felt like in my bones, this kind of swelling of opposition, where I thought to myself, well, that's not true, because I had been presenting as calm and I had worked so hard to, outward facing, at least, to, be collected and gathered and graceful through all of this turmoil and all of this pain. And so for him to take one look at me and say, you're a nervous child, it blew my whole presentation and the whole way I was presenting to shreds. And I just, in that moment, realized that there was something deeper going on, right? Like this man saw through me.
Yeah. So can I just ask you, when you talk about because Chinese medicine is very intuitive. Mm-hmm. They just pulse you up and they probably like systematize and they typify you. And I know the system really well. And the fact that he said that you were very nervous, can you kind of elaborate on your nervousness at the time?
Yes, absolutely.
Background, all about Shauna in her years.
Sure. Yes. I mean, I think, just to clarify, by nature, I'm not a nervous person. I think that my wiring and my DNA is really sturdy and free-spirited and abundant and joyful and trusting. But of course, we go through things in life, you can call it trauma or, hardship or experiences that create opportunities for resilience or wear and tear, and usually both. And unfortunately, that part of us that feels activated and alive and free becomes oppressed. And so for me, that nervousness was a hypervigilance due to circumstances and situations in my home growing up that felt really unsafe. My parents divorced when I was 3. My mother struggled with drinking early on in my life. And then there were a series of men in our home who were introduced to us at a young age who were also not safe and who made, the environment uncomfortable, both during waking and sleeping hours, frankly. And so I learned very young to stay awake, to protect myself at night, and during the day to be very alert for signs of danger. And also, with parents who are going through their own trauma and trying to self-medicate and cope, children unfortunately bear the brunt of that by trying to pacify and please their parents in order to ensure their own safety. So hypervigilance is often a consequence, at least it was in my case, of really looking for signs around me as to who was in a good space emotionally and who required support. And then adjusting my behaviors and attitudes and verbiage and everything to accommodate and pacify whatever I perceived the need to be, right? And so when you're doing that, when you're constantly calculating the needs of people around you, your own needs get missed. Not to mention that as a child, your needs should be being met preemptively anyway by your caretakers, right? Like, it's not your job to be caring for those around you who are supposed to be in positions of authority and caretaking. So that role reversal was very confusing and is confusing for many of us. I mean, I think the majority of us, regardless of our parenting.
Can I just clarify what you just said? You feel like when you were young, you took the role of a caretaker for your parents or your family?
I believe so. And I actually think many of us do this subconsciously.
Yeah.
We looked to our parents for safety and guidance. So if they're struggling emotionally, physically, mentally, financially, without even realizing it, sometimes we inherit that burden and do our best to alleviate their pain, their suffering, their fear, their anxiety, their depression, by providing for them the very things that they should be giving to us. And so it creates a kind of vicious cycle where we begin to ignore our own needs and impulses in order to satiate theirs.
Yeah. Well, you are so composed, and your work on resilience is so amazing because I believe in that so much too. But one thing that I do want to ask you is, for me, it's kind of similar, different cultural backgrounds, but I have to say, I didn't know all the things that I was subject to when I was young. And that word, hypervigilance, really hits home for me because I was the most hyper vigilant. I knew my surroundings, my skin will crawl, hair will stand, that term, where I'm constantly kind of, navigating my surroundings to make sure, never understood why, used to drive my friends crazy. And I used to feel very broken because I couldn't calm that nervous system down in my 20s and 30s and 40s and beyond. And I had to take a long time to reflect upon it. But it sounds like you had a very good understanding of all. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you've done so much work to realize this. So my question to you is, when did you really understand that about yourself?
Well, it's happened in layers, and it's happened at different intervals throughout my life. So there wasn't sort of this outpouring of knowledge and wisdom and revelation, right? The understanding was never immediate. It happens when we're ready for it. We understand more about our psyche and our systems and what we're navigating emotionally and the terrain beneath the conscious layers, right, begin to surface when we're ready to process them. So we can only integrate what our nervous system is capable of metabolizing. So for me, I would say stage 1 was at 14 when I got very sick with my intestinal issues and stomach issues and had to confront that I had some anger that I was repressing, right? So that was step 1. Step 2 happened at 19. I did a wildly outrageous and extreme thing to my body, a very, very long fast that I did not prepare for in a strategic way because I was young and impulsive. That led to the next level. I was doing that because I became involved for maybe, let's see, gosh, math is not my forte. You're probably better at math than I am as a doctor. But from about age 15 to age 22, I became pretty religious, and was looking for ways to feel not just grounded, but really alive. And like I could escape the normalcy of everyday life and the fear and pain and experience something larger. And I think I have always had this craving for magic and life outside the realm of reality, because I learned very, very young to escape to my imagination, to feel like I was in a safer, healthier place. And I just really, for better, excuse me, for better, for worse, took it to an extreme. At that time in my life, I became a part of a religious organization that was encouraging its members to fast. And, at 19 was like, wow, I can become basically like superwoman overnight if I do this. And what happened on the other side of that was, one, I distanced myself from formalized religion and just integrated a sense of spirituality that's much more neutral and agnostic, I would say. I still pray daily, but I have a very kind of open sense of what's possible, and my understanding, I would say, is elusive at best. I still believe that there are unseen forces out there at play, but I no longer am tied to any kind of formal practice. That being said, I was really, when you take your body to any level of an extreme, right? Like whether it's ulcers or a chosen fast, you are pushed into a place psychologically that forces you to address underlying issues and trauma. So whether it happens to you or you subconsciously or consciously choose it, often extreme situations press us into a discomfort where we can no longer manage our stress with the coping mechanisms that we've employed to feel safe and function practically and appear normal, in quotes, appear to have it together, right? So it's like
a breaking point is reached.
There's a breaking point, yeah. And I would say the third major layer, the third sort of, moment in time where more surfaced was after the birth of my daughter. Because when you have a child, and I wish that everyone talked about this, when you have a child, whatever is unprocessed about your childhood is sure to surface. Like at some point, all of the things that you've been able to kind of hold together because you're an independent functioning person begins to crack if you haven't addressed your own parenting, how you were parented, the ways in which you were and were not cared for as a child, right? Like all of that comes forward when you become a parent yourself. And for me, after having my son, I think because he was a boy, I wasn't taken to that place psychologically. But when I had a daughter and was beginning to see myself and my child self reflected in her eyes and her innocence and her helplessness, something in me got triggered again for the third time. And it was like, okay, there's a whole nother layer of healing now that needs to take place, where I have to be really honest about these other areas of my life where I've, worked through things, but still I'm holding on to a lot of pain. And so again, just to kind of reiterate and come full circle, healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a journey. I mean, that word is so overused and cliche, but it's a path that is not linear. It's winding. There's no right way to approach it. There's so many different textures and dimensions to what it requires, I think, for many of us to feel whole. And at different stages of our life, different things will pop up. You may have healed your relationship with your father and then realize that you have insecurities about something else, that's rooted in a whole other area of your life. And there are always opportunities to address the next layer of stress.
Well, Shauna, I just have to tell you, I've been working with my patients for over 30 years now. And, your ability to go from that circumstance to go through the layers of healing at 19, falling into the religious to up to 22, you said. And then I think the tail end of that, because you were so extreme, looking for some stability there, the tail end of that, you came out spiritually a lot more consciousness opened. So then I don't think your belief went anywhere. I think you just took the organized religion into something so much more vast. That's what I see, the second layer. And then when your daughter came, not your son, but your daughter, you saw a reflection of you in her. So all that to say, I think that is a gift that you have, is the ability to see above and beyond what's happening, to really look and reflect, because that's not something that comes easily for many people. Because I know, when we're up against an obstacle of unfathomable difficulty, you're just faced with either A, victimhood in being defined as this broken thing, or you have to muster up so much courage. Or sometimes I think for me, it was, I had no other choice but to do this because I was going to die this way. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
But for you, I just want to know what sparked that in you to keep searching, because you say it's a journey, but I think your life has been one of resilience all the way through.
I think that in my gut, in my spirit, in my soul, I know that I keep using this word today, an alive person, like an engaged, joyful person who is very sensorial and is meant to live a life of bliss. I just know that about myself. And I know that about all people. Like, I think that fundamentally we're wired for it. And what happens is that the stress layers on top of our resilience and our joy, and we are clouded in terms of really accessing who we are fundamentally. And so my work in life has been not so much to sort of establish my identity from scratch over and over again, but to peel away the layers of who I'm not, and to just get back to the core of who fundamentally I know I am. And we're all wired for and meant for tremendous joy, and we have capacity for resilience, but we aren't given the tools, necessarily to get from A to Z. What creates the drive for that, or the belief that that's possible? I'm not sure. I think part of that is just that I'm like a lover of pleasure. I'm a lover of the senses. I love to smell things and eat food that tastes delicious.
You sound like
a lover of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love to sing. I love to dance. I love to write. I love people. I'm a people person. I mean, I will talk to anyone at any time on the street about their story. And if I sit at a restaurant alone, my favorite thing to do is talk to strangers. So I feel like life is just full of vast opportunities to experience pleasure.
Yeah.
And so when things keep me from that, it bothers me. Yeah. Right? It's like, this doesn't feel true. In essence, this isn't the life I'm supposed to live. And so I think I have this very primal, I don't know if it's a reactivity, but like a response that is ingrained in me to get back to a place where I'm fully available and open to what life has to offer. And anything that's holding me back just doesn't work for me. I don't want it. I want nothing to do with it.
Well, so it leads me back to my question for you is, you said you were hypervigilant, that the Chinese medical doctor told you you're a very nervous person, and somewhere viscerally you reacted to that, like, no, you're not. And you knew that at the core.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you, and I believe that too, because look at you now. I cannot see a sign of hypervigilance or anxiety in you. You're so collected and calm and grounded. And I see you as somebody who's evolved beyond and just loving life today. So I want to ask you, because I think I just want to contextualize this for the listeners, because a lot of my listeners are going through some things. They've been told one thing and tried all the other things. And I think oftentimes We try, even in the name of holistic medicine, we try many different things based on what everybody else recommends. And we fail to see, and I love how you put it, that you never gave up on the essence of you. You almost described it as peeling off the layers to reveal this very abundant, joyful being that you've always been, but conditionally you were sort of had to navigate. You had coping strategies to survive. And now I want patients to understand with your Crohn's disease, I want everybody to know, she's beautiful and she looks super healthy today, but Crohn's disease is exhausting. It's not something you want to have. And I know she says it and just kind of glossed over it, but your teenage years, I can imagine what that was like to have moon face, prednisone, body image, all messed up.
It was pretty intense.
Not only that, the neutropenia. I mean, I had severe neutropenia, which almost killed me back in 2019 too. And I mean, you've gone through so much. And so I want to make sure listeners understand sort of that downside of what you had to overcome, because I don't think I began there upon our starting point. So can you just elaborate there?
Yes, of course. Well, so when I saw this doctor, this Eastern medicine practitioner, what became clear to me was that he was on to me, right? He didn't know that at my core, I'm a peaceful, embodied person, but I had developed that hypervigilance for survival purposes. The primal animal part of us as human beings, we do what we need to do to survive, right? And for some people, that means shutting down and we become depressed. For others, it's becoming anxious. For others, it's, trying to control our eating or exercising, right? Like we all have ways of trying to manage stress. So in that moment, I knew that I had work to do internally, but physiologically, I'll let you know sort of what the evolution was for the Crohn's and where I am today. So I ended up taking Chinese herbs for another year, a full year after getting I weaned off of the prednisone, the Asacol, the Tylenol with codeine, all the things. I took Chinese herbs. I mean, my recollection's a little muddled timing wise. It was at least a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe longer of Chinese herbs. I saw also a homeopathic doctor who put me on a homeopathic protocol, and I saw a nutritionist. And the nutritionist really taught me about being mindful about what I put in my body. And Dr. Connie, I listened to your podcast and I love it. And what I love about your approach to eating is that it's mindfulness based. So you're saying to people, nothing is wrong inherently. Nothing's going to harm you intrinsically because it is what it is and you are who you are. And there's a lack of synergy between what you're putting in your body and who you are, what your system requires fundamentally. It's fun. It's not listening to your body that's at the source of the problem. At the root of many of our troubles is that we're not slowing down for long enough to recognize what our body is healthily responding to and digesting and what it's not. So a lot of what the nutritionist taught me about was, certain foods to avoid for Crohn's, certainly during my heightened period of inflammation, but mostly just understanding portions, understanding when I was eating too much or too little, understanding when I felt full, and how anxiety was driving some of my eating patterns and choices, right? Like when you're uncomfortable psychologically or emotionally feeling dissatisfied, you make certain food choices that you might not from a place of balance and embodiment and mindfulness and consciousness. So, or conscientiousness, all of the C's. But so a lot of the nutritionist work with me was more psychological than physical. And in putting all of these pieces together and slowing my life down and going like, oh, wow, when I have this thought, my shoulders feel like there are small animals living in them. Like I now have tight shoulders, my back hurts, my hips are tight. I'm not sleeping when I don't do X, Y, or Z before bed. It's like just really beginning to recognize our patterns and become aware of what's working and what's not. And that was a process for me of a couple of years. And I want to say that I have been in remission since I was a teenager from Crohn's. I have not ever, not once relapsed, ever. Okay. And I was told by my doctors this was going to be something I was going to deal with my whole life, that I would potentially have flare ups in times of stress. Now, I'll tell you, I have had other issues in times of stress physically, right? So, what I believe about the body and the body mind connection is that if we're not processing something on a soul level in our hearts, it will land in our bodies physically. It will find a physical home. So, for me, my stress moved away from my stomach and my intestines into my throat. And I was having a lot of issues with my sinuses in my early 20s, right? And then it was the next thing and the next thing. And so we have to continue to be aware of where we are housing our tension, the misalignment, the resentment, the anger, whatever it is you're feeling towards your mom or your dad or your husband or yourself that you haven't fully integrated and processed, it's living somewhere in your body, right? And if you heal one issue, but you haven't actually addressed the underlying trauma or source of stress or source of fatigue or malabsorption or indigestion or whatever it is you're dealing with, it's going to find a new home. And so my body was very clever about just relocating stress and trauma. And then it would be another wave of healing, like understanding then for my respiratory tract, because I felt like that was very connected to my throat and needing to have a voice. And I, through that time, found singing. And singing was a huge part of my release. It's how I learned to turn the volume up of my voice and speak my needs and assert myself and create boundaries. Singing was how I went from suffocating myself and trying to please everyone to having a powerful and empowered life where I state my needs, I say who I am, and I determine what works for my life and what doesn't, right? So interestingly, healing also and being well has so much more to do with, I believe, like finding our voice and our place in terms of understanding who we are relative to who other people want us to be, and that has as profound or more profound of an impact as what we eat.
Can I just ask you, you had said that you've come to be very mindful. And it's one of those words too, in my opinion, that mindfulness, be mindful, reduce stress, manage your stress. And most of my patients don't know what that means. And a lot of the time, yeah. And so I want you to elaborate on sort of, well, I just want to kind of clarify the mindfulness and the eating part is basically, please agree with me if this is what you mean, is when I hear you, I feel like before, when you felt threatened and not secure, you were so in your head, creating a narrative and a protective mechanism all around you to adopt a new way for Shauna to protect her safety. And that became an armor. And it's like when you said, you always talk about the mindfulness and connection between the body and mind and going right to the soul. And that's so beautiful. I feel like when you said everything has to process and metabolize the feelings and all the things, trauma, I want to ask you, when you were addressing all the issues that were coming up, like peeling the onion, so my listeners can understand you a little bit more in terms of what they can do, I want you to kind of elaborate on how did you address those little issues? Because the reason why I ask is a lot of people will go to therapy and they'll hash out the past. And then they get further into the memory of that and they relive that nervous system, psychosomatic response all over again. And then they just get down on themselves. And it's hard to pull themselves out of that. You know what I mean? And to have your level of awareness, Shauna, it's really uncanny, because that's not what I experience with my patients, is why I'm asking you these detailed questions. These are things that get stuck on. So I want you to kind of talk about how each of the things that came up, how you were able to address and metabolize as you felt them in your body, and how you had said, my voice, it went from my gut to my voice, and you were able to tap on. And then brilliantly, you found your singing. Not many people will do that. In my people, they will say, but my husband, but my kids, they feel stuck. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But you were able to.
Well, we have a tendency to imprison ourselves.
Yeah.
I think partially because it's just scary to move forward when we're used to certain patterns and ways of being in the world.
Yeah.
Even if we have the opportunity and resources financially or in terms of our time and energy, we might find ourselves creating excuses as to why we can't move outside a pattern.
Did you
And
have
that's
that?
because it's unknown.
Did you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I still do, Dr. Connie. I still do, because I'm moving forward in my life every day, right? This isn't a static process. My work isn't done. So, when I was 14 and couldn't digest my life, I couldn't digest food. To me, that was very symbolic. I couldn't digest my life, right? All of those feelings and emotions were undigested. They were indigestible. I hadn't processed them. And so they were just, it was that whole relationship to food was indicative of a much larger sort of paradigm. Okay. So in terms of the stuckness, we need to make a choice to unstick ourselves. And for me, it's very much about integrating physiologically on a cellular level what my body is communicating with me, and my experience of my body at any given moment with the story I'm telling myself in my mind. So I've done traditional therapy. I don't know if you know this, Dr. Connie. I went to grad school for clinical psychology. I did not finish because I was also a musician at the time and had to make a choice about what I was going to do. But I did, many, many classes on a graduate level of clinical psychology. I've been to so many, psychiatrists, psychologists. I've never been medicated for a psychological challenge, but I'm very aware, of the psychology piece. And what I'll say is that it's important to be aware of and in touch with your story, but it needs to be integrated in your body. So like you were saying, if you're just reliving the trauma over and over and over and revisiting the past from a sensorial perspective, but not moving past your cerebral mind, in my own experience, nothing changes. There's really no progress. Okay. I think it's a beautiful first step, but we then need to process the experience in our bodies. So for me, that's a couple of things. It's first of all, deciding that the past is in the past and that you can move forward with a completely new experience and a completely new chapter in your life without feeling imprisoned by and enslaved to the emotions of your past. So anxiety, depression, there were a lot of things that were a really big kind of undercurrent in my life that are no longer an everyday battle for me. And that was in part a decision I made. I decided that I did not need to live with anxiety and depression, but I didn't know how to get out of that feeling. What I knew was that reliving my past over and over again by talking about it was important as a first step, like I said, but not the complete answer, because I still felt imprisoned by my emotions and by those experiences, viscerally, sensorily. I felt so trapped. So I actually became a certified Reiki therapist. And there are many ways to approach this. But the idea for me is that there's an energy body that we all live with, in addition to a physical body. And our cells are always vibrating, right, at a certain frequency. And we can change that frequency depending on what we think. and how we think about our lives and what we're going through. And that's where the choice comes in, right? Like I can take a moment where I feel stressed. I shared before we pressed play that I've been up since 2 a.m. because our brand new smoke alarm went off, our smoke sensor, our detector went off in the middle of the night. And I made a choice before speaking with you that I was going to show up exactly as I am in this moment, not my best, right? Like not fully energized, not well rested, and just be authentic and have a meaningful conversation with you. That was a choice I made. A different choice could have been to, which I contemplated doing, email you and say, this is an impossible morning for me. We can't do this, right? We have to start with reality. The reality is imperfect always. We're never going to have a perfect day, a moment maybe, but maybe not even a perfect minute in our lives. Like life is really embedded with a lot of reality that's gritty and textured and raw and imperfect and changing, and it changes. And when you feel good one moment, the next minute you're struggling with something, someone hits you on the freeway and you're stuck in traffic. Like life is full, right? Like life is in session for all of us at all times. So I think a huge part of feeling well is getting out of our minds once we're aware of the story and writing a new script. And what that means is taking control of the narrative and going like, right now in this moment, I can have access to joy. I'm going to make a choice to reframe what's happening in this moment in a way that will calm my nervous system and create an opportunity for abundance and growth. For instance, again, back to our conversation, my thought that I had logging on today was, I wonder if because I'm tired, this will even be a more profound talk, because there are no pretenses here. I don't have the energy to frame things in a perfect way, to be articulate in the ways that sometimes I can be when, I'm fully gathered with all of my internal resources. Like I'm just showing up with what I've got and hoping that it's enough. And I think that in any given moment in time, we can decide that we're enough, our life is enough, we have what we need, and we can access what we want. So right now, what I want is to connect with you and the people who are listening and help change their lives. Like that's it. That's my intention. And so when we create that intention and are really clear and focused on it, and then let go and just see what happens, it's this beautiful dance of consciousness and mindfulness and allowance, right? Like last night, at a certain point when I couldn't fall back to sleep, I realized it was because I was trying too hard to sleep. And what I said to myself was, wow, I need to practice receiving. Because what if in this moment, instead of trying to sleep, I received sleep? What if in this moment, okay, like 3 hours later, instead of trying to get help, I receive support? What if instead of trying to create clarity, I receive revelation? What if instead of trying to make money, I receive abundance, right? Like something clicked in me last night where I realized that so much of our healing is also just allowing us to access the resources we already have available to us, whether that's support from friends or the opportunity to pause in the middle of the day and be aware of the fact that maybe you're not breathing deeply enough and take a deep breath. For me, the Reiki is really just about being aware that I'm an energetic body and giving myself a little TLC throughout the day when I need to take a deep breath. That is such a beautiful, simple act of self-care. Drinking a glass of water when you're tired, it's these simple things that when we begin to respond to ourselves on a cellular level, consistently, day after day, we teach ourselves that we're worthy of love, that we're worthy of respect, and we cultivate an attitude that we can have anything we want because we're already giving it to ourselves. So instead of waiting for the answers and waiting for a conclusion to arrive externally through external forces, we're already entrusting ourselves to provide ourselves, our own bodies and our own minds and spirits with the resilience that we're looking for outside of us.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how I believe we begin to connect mind, body, and soul, or mind, body, and spirit. We stop and breathe, and we decide to take back our power by telling ourselves exactly what we would want someone else to say to us today. Today, what I would want someone to say to me is, you're enough showing up exactly as you are. You have everything in your body that you need to make this day beautiful, right? So I'm going to tell myself those things. I'm not waiting for you to say it to me, right? Like I have the power to create a dialogue that relaxes my nervous system and begins to move what feels stuck out of my body. Now, trauma is really tricky depending on the severity of the trauma. There are many methods to healing trauma, and some of us who have experienced really deep wounds require support. And I have learned so much through different therapists I've worked with, experimenting with different therapeutic methods. I've done hypnosis with, all different kinds of therapies that have helped support integrating the mind-body awareness and connection. And in my book, You Are the Boss of You, I introduce people to a lot of those methodologies. Okay. So, it is something worth exploring in terms of what you feel intuitively you connect with, and just experimenting. Like for one person, it might be yoga. For another person, it might be meditation. It might be hypnotherapy with neurolinguistic reprogramming. It might be cognitive behavioral therapy. There are many, many different ways to care for ourselves and our emotional lives and get the therapeutic methods that we need to feel fully supported. And my book is a very cost-effective way to be introduced to a lot of those, possibilities.
So would you say, as I said, like a lot of my listeners have gone through functional medical doctors, holistic doctors, even Eastern medicine, and of course, conventional medicine, and they just feel so out of sorts. And what I hear you say is, you really did take agency over your body, is what you're teaching. You're really teaching, in my opinion, empowerment, so that people can step into their power and finding. And in your book, it sounds like you've really been intentional about sharing all the tools, but I love how you say, not every tool is going to be for everybody. See what strikes for you, right?
And absolutely. I mean, it's like it's like dating, right? You don't marry the first person you date.
Yeah. And I just want to say that in essence, I feel like because I really feel like recently I came to this realization, like if only people can just get real with themselves. And like how you said, you woke up tired and you decided, regardless, this is how you're going to show up. By no means are you going to be perfect, but your intention is to help my listeners, because you told me, and we had this date set, that you were going to show up as your best in your present condition, which tells me you're really real with yourself. And at the same time, that's being graceful and giving yourself that space to just allow things to happen with an understanding that this is your condition right now, but you're still moving forward in this way. And to me,
and also I'll eat a snack after, and I will do a meditation, and I will space my work calls today. I will actually treat my body the way it deserves to be treated, right? So I'm not going to override the reality of what I'm experiencing physiologically or mentally because I want it to be different, right? Like I had an agenda for this day that needs to now shift after this call, right? Like there are a lot of things about this day I'm going to rearrange based on my current condition. So I think it's this beautiful understanding that happens moment to moment between what is real, what's really happening, and how we respond to what reality is versus what we wish it were in any given moment in time.
For those of you listening, she just demonstrated what it looks like to manage stress. simply, is she's regarding herself first and foremost, being in tune with it. But regardless, she shows up as her best self and she doesn't judge herself and is not hard on herself. Or are you pushing through anyway? There's going to be a lot of shifts.
No, I mean, pushing through is, I think, at the root of a lot of trauma for all of us physiologically when we override our needs. I mean, for me personally, I can't generalize for anyone else. I'll say that everything I've been through in terms of autoimmune issues specifically, I can reduce to two major errors, maybe in the way that I'm managing my life. One is not feeling all of my feelings and suffocating my feelings. So in my youth, I would say I didn't feel like I had permission to be angry or to feel upset with people. Like that didn't feel like a safe reaction to have. So I judged myself harshly. I was very self-critical. I had very perfectionistic and unrealistic standards for myself. And I was more prone to depression than anger, right? Like if I was actually experiencing rage, I would immediately transmute that experience to sadness, depression, or self-harm.
Yeah.
Exactly, right? Because it wasn't safe for me to express that.
Or process.
So exactly. Even within my own psyche. Right?
I will add, Shauna, that at that time, you didn't even know what that was.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really took me even through my 20s to really, late 20s, to really begin to understand the distortion of how for so many years I've used sadness and tears as a cover for outrage in different areas of my life. And how that vulnerability of accessing all of your emotions unlocks a whole bunch of things physiologically. Yeah. And it's so important to undergo the ride and just to be available for the process of really getting in touch with what you're actually feeling, not what you're supposed to be feeling or what you've trained yourself to feel because it wasn't safe to have other feelings in your house.
Get real and truthful with yourself is at the heart. And would you agree, Shauna, with all that physiological, you said this again, when I say root cause stems from the inside of us. And it's the nervous system dysregulation. You were able to find out what was dysregulated and you peeled off the layers to see and save the Shauna, the great abundant Shauna and joyful Shauna, and she is unlocked, unleashed, and she is now just blossoming in this world. It's as if you're reborn in this way, in this time, and you're sort of going back and nurturing her way through. And that's why you say healing still happens today. You're still a work in progress.
It still happens. And it's also, part two of, I think, a lot of what people are suffering from is just not listening to their bodies. And like I said, kind of overriding what's really happening in lieu of what we think should be happening or what we think the people around us want from us. Like if our coworkers want us to produce at work, or if our partners in life want us to present a certain way, or if we want to be super mom and meet the deadline and cook the perfect dinner and all of the, all of these expectations that build up where we don't let ourselves rest, replenish, restore, have solitude and have grace for time management, like all of that, it really leads to trouble. Physically, we begin to break down. And so I think part two, that is an everyday, it's an imperative. I'll use that word. It's an everyday imperative for us to take inventory.
Skill that everybody can grab your book and learn those skills. And then you can select and choose what works for you. Don't think everything in there is going to work and you're going to align with it. And then I think too, there's different parts of your life and different times where you'll kind of come back. And I feel like your book is one of those books that are timeless. And it teaches you the skill. And here's another thing that I want to share with you, Shauna, is, I believe we were born in this world genetically inclined with the genetics, right? So that's the first thing. You have some genetic predispositions that are wonderful. And I want everybody to know, everybody, no matter what they're going through, they're perfect the way they are. That's our genetic disposition. And then we get influenced, and we call this in functional medicine epigenomics. And that's all the conditioning and all the circumstances, all the trauma layers of things outside in that we experience. And then we formulate a coping strategy, which leads me to the third thing, which is I call psychosomatic behavior. These are all adaptive things, maladaptive things that we do in terms of coping with it, whether it be just completely neglecting your body, just pushing go, and pushing through and achieve just to feel worthy, because we never got that in our epigenomics. And so I say, the symptoms you were experiencing, like Crohn's and all the other things, the respiratory things that you were explaining, that's all effects of something deeper. And I think you said it so beautifully, and I'm so glad you showed up today. And I just want you to kind of talk a little bit about your book, because we're all going to go and grab it. Please tell us about your book, and last few things to say where we can find you so we can follow you and root you on and you for your beautiful work.
Thank you. First of all, I want to just say that I listened to your podcast and I'm such a huge fan. So just being here in your presence and getting to connect with you personally is deeply meaningful to me. I'm really honored for this moment in time. My book is called You Are the Boss of You, and it is broken down into 10 chapters that are really the building blocks for living an emotionally abundant, inspired, free life, right? So all the things we've been talking about in this conversation, Connie, can be, in my opinion, sort of categorized into these 10 basic building blocks that will really together help people live a life that does strip away everything that isn't theirs. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly run through them. It's defining boundaries, soothing yourself, softening perfectionism, redefining your self-concept, honoring sleep, healing trauma, feeling it all, creating your rhythm, advocating for yourself, and building your future. So when you read this book, you can see how all of these threads connect, Dr. Connie. Like one without another, fine. But if you really dissect all of these chapters, they create the entire picture of the different facets of our lives that can create lasting health and lasting abundance. The book is available on Amazon. You Are the Boss of You.
Yes.
My personal Instagram is at Shauna Brittenham Reiter. And there's a workbook that I created to accompany You Are the Boss of You, because I think it's really important to get out of theory. Like you were saying, a lot of your listeners just relive the trauma over and over, and there's nothing that is actually practically changing their experience and how they feel on a day in, day out basis. So regardless of whether or not you know what's going on, we then need to move the needle in terms of how we are experiencing our lives and feel in our own skin and our bodies and minds on a day in, day out, right? Reality. So if you go to helloshauna.com, you'll be able to download the bonus workbook, which is beautiful exercises that most of which I created and some of which I've pulled from, things I've experienced over the years and just reframed and refined, that will actually help you experientially make changes, the kinds of changes your listeners are feeling like they're struggling with potentially. The exercises in the book, in conjunction with reading You Are the Boss of You, these together, I really hope will create not just a new framework and in terms of ways of thinking about our lives, but a new experience in terms of how we are living our lives and how we feel about ourselves and our place in the world.
Thank you
moving
so
forward.
Much. Basically, you're saying read the book, and it's a great. But I always say, if you read the book, that's great, but the application comes, and unless you apply it, you will never know. So you have to do inner knowing. You've given us the experience of it, and you've been so tangible in your approach. I really am blown away by your kindness, your courage, your vulnerability, and just sheer authenticity. I think you're just going to be so phenomenal, and you already are. We're going to be all following you, and I'll be talking about you. so much.
Thank
And
you so much.
it's been an honor, Shauna. Really, you are,
Thank you.
and I hope you shift your day to introduce.
I'm deciding. I'm deciding how my day's going to go because it's in my power to do so. And I really appreciate your time, your care, your tender words, your encouragement, your inspiration. It's all so beautiful. The work that you're doing to help people heal and really define their own healing in their own voice. Because that's what, when I listen to your podcast, you are constantly referring people back to themselves. We are ultimately our own home. So take my book, take your podcast, right, and filter it through your own levels of intuition and knowing and inner guidance to get to where you want to go. And you'll be there. You'll end up there. I'm sure of it.
Well, I thank you so much, Shauna. I'm going to link on the show notes the Amazon link, your Instagram, as well as the workbook where it can be found on your website. It's beautiful, and we've all looked at it. Thank you so much, Shauna.
Thank you.
I'll be in touch in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
You too. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Mind Your Health podcast. I hope you found our discussion insightful and inspiring. Remember, your journey to wellness is a continuous process, and every step you take brings you closer to optimal health. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with others who might benefit. Stay also connected with us on @Dr. Connie Chung on YouTube as well as Instagram for more resources and updates. Until next time, take care of your mind, nurture your body, and honor